Now, for today's program, which is part of Moment's Antisemitism project, supported by the Joyce and Irving Goldman Family Foundation and in partnership with Theater J. Hayley Finn is the artistic director at Theater J in Washington, D.C. She has over 25 years of experience in professional theater across all aspects of the profession, including producing, directing, casting, education, and fundraising. She has also been instrumental in creating national partnerships for theaters across the country. Hayley is the director of Theater J's current production, Prayer for the French Republic. Dr. Lauren Strauss is Senior Professorial Lecturer in Jewish History at American University and Director of Undergraduate Studies for AU's Jewish Studies program. A scholar of American Jewish political and cultural history, her current book project is Painting the Town Red, Jewish Visual Artists, Yiddish Culture, and Radical Politics in Interwar New York. And her next book explores political activism in the DC Jewish community and the interaction between American Jews and democracy. Joining Hayley and Lauren today is Amy E. Schwartz, Moment Magazine's book and opinion editor, as well as editor of the magazine's popular Ask the Rabbi section. Amy has won first place in commentary from the Religion News Association and is the editor of the book Can Robots Be Jewish? And Other Pressing Questions of Modern Life. Please welcome Hayley Finn, Lauren Strauss, and Amy E. Schwartz.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming on. And it's a wonderful play. Both Suzanne and I have been privileged to see it. And I hope we'll be able to talk not just about the play, but about all the themes that the play connects to in our minds, in our psyches. So, Hayley, I'm going to start with you. What made you decide to stage this play at this time? And how does it play differently in this time and place from maybe the way it played when it was last done? It's been on Broadway.
Sure. It's very resonant, maybe too resonant in some cases. One might say the play really asks the central question, where are we safe as Jewish people? And it's a family confronting this question. Specifically, their son was attacked. It was an act of anti-Semitism, and they are confronting this question head on. It's certainly a question in a lot of our minds at this moment, where are we safe? And this play it was relevant when it was first written. Was relevant when it was on Broadway. It's relevant now. It continues to be relevant, and perhaps in the past year, even more relevant. In addition to that, we're here at Theater J in Washington, D.C., and I knew this play was going to happen around the election. And to me, it was really meaningful to have a play that brought that question to our city at this moment, but also the question of democracy and the importance of democracy, the significance of democracy, which is a theme that comes up throughout this play. The play is set in 2016 in Paris. And the playwright was very much inspired by the 2016 election that happened here in the United States, and all that happened post that election. And in 2016, 2017, where the play takes place in Paris, this family is very concerned about Le Pen. And that election that was happening at that time. So again, it felt, well, to have this play, and here we are again in this cycle, it seemed very important.
Mhm. So, and Lauren, to take that up from a slightly different angle, you brought your students to see the play, and your students from American University, and then you also did a talk back after the play with the audience. So, what is it about the play that's speaking to those audiences now, and what were the major themes you wanted to bring out for them?
First of all, thank you, and Suzanne, who's no longer on the
She's been there.
Zoom visible, for inviting us to have this conversation. It is, it's almost ridiculously obvious to say that it is timely. Some things are timely. This is more timely,
Super timely.
more timely than we want it to be. And so I thought the play was phenomenal. I just want to say, all kudos to Hayley and to Theater J and the actors. Any of you who are listening, if you're in the DC area, you really should catch it on its run. And my students not only sat there for 3 hours and were riveted, but they keep thanking me for bringing them. And I've brought students to plays and other cultural events before, and they were always very polite, but they really, it was so heartfelt this time. And, part of it is because it's an excellent production, but also a lot of them are searching for not even necessarily answers to these large questions about what to do about anti-Semitism, what to do about democracy. And I should note that by a long shot, not all of my students are Jewish. So these are questions, of course, that are coming up in America in general. What's going to happen with democracy? But it made them at least feel good to know that they're not alone in the sense that other people are asking these things and that other people are in conversation about these things. So I think those two aspects, the just the excellence of the production and of the writing, it's a really well written play, and also of just the moment and making people in that room, in the space of a theater, feel like they're part of a community, I think was very powerful.
And what was the talk back like? Did people ask questions sort of
Um,
raising those themes?
There were fewer questions. I mean, it was very brief because as I did it with my colleague Michael Brenner, who also teaches here at American University. Frankly, we both had to run to our next event, so it was kind of short. But seemed to be more interest in among the audience members who stayed in listening to what we had to say. And sometimes people are a little bit shy in that context. A couple of people came up to me after the talkback was over and said, I didn't want to ask this in front of everyone, but can you answer this? But Hayley asked great questions.
Well, and I would think, just having seen it the other night, I mean, after this play, the audience is pretty drained and exhausted.
Yes.
They might not be really
I have to
super
say,
full of interesting questions, you know.
it's a different it's different from Leopoldstadt for a lot of reasons, but one very important reason is that Leopoldstadt has no intermissions, and Prayer for the Red Republic has
There's
two, not one, but
two
two
intermissions.
bathroom breaks. So very
Yes,
important.
a completely different experience in so many ways. Haley, did you
Yes.
want to take up any of those themes and talk further about them?
Well, I
Um,
wanted to thank Lauren and Michael for being part of that conversation afterwards. I think it's so important to create space for those conversations. Yeah, I mean, I think that even in the past week, the play has changed with audiences coming in and responding to lines in the play that are resonating in new and different ways. And so, one of the things that's so beautiful about a play, I mean, Joshua Harmon wrote this incredible play, and it had a beautiful life and continues to have a life. But part of what's great about a play is that you're doing it in community. You're telling the story in community with who's in the room, with whatever's happened that day with their lives. And so that sort of kinesthetic, organic relationship makes it a communal event that can be really, really powerful, especially when dealing with these big and important themes around democracy in this moment.
so you're talking partly about the election, but also partly about what happened in Amsterdam, right? When you say
All of it, yes.
the things people react to. Can you do have an example of like a line people reacted to that you didn't
Well, there's
expect?
there's there's many of them. I don't know
Just give us
if
one.
I
We don't want too
I
many
mean
spoilers.
Right.
I don't want to get into too many spoilers, but I would
No,
say
no spoilers.
there's some of the comments that some of the characters make, are make it very clear what their political positions are, and that many of the audience members shared those opinions.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
would say. So that's been some of what's happening over the past week, and then and certainly the lines about being safe. It just breaks my heart every time Marcel, who's the mother, just says like, where can my family be safe? Where can we be safe? And just not knowing the answer to that question and struggling with it and this really like deep maternal level, I think is very palpable and and ripples through the audience in a profound way.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and I think what you just alluded to in passing is a very interesting additional dimension of it, which is that, we think of this as a discussion being had among Jews, but there are a lot of communities that
Right.
are saying, can we be safe? Can our children be safe? Not just, not just Jews. So just to take that up a little more, the question, the play raises the question, and of course it's what and Hayley, you've alluded to this a few times. So if one question is, where can Jews be safe? Can they be safe anywhere? The follow-up question to that seems to be, are we safer in democracies?
Mm.
And if so, like, how does that work? And to what extent is that true? So Lauren, you want to take that up? What do you think? What are I know the people in the play, as plays go, think all sorts of different aspects of this. It's a play, it doesn't have a single answer, but how would you approach that question?
Well, sort of answering a question with a question. It's,
Yeah.
it's
You
part
do
of our
that.
DNA.
Right.
Um, at what point is a democracy no longer a democracy? And what is a democracy, right? So some people, I think wrongly, feel that a democracy is at a very simple, even simplistic level, majority rule.
Mm-hmm.
One person, one vote, and and you get to call the shots for the fate. Now, that may be true in terms of policy, et cetera, but the way, that hopefully it works, that France and the United States are predicated on this belief, is that there are certain structures that predate and outlast any momentary majority rule. Things like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the idea of an independent judiciary, and so that it's much more complicated than just sort of majority rules, and that at the end of the day, one of the goals of having those more disconnected institutions and protecting them is to protect the people who are not in the majority. And one of my favorite, I don't know if it's an aphorism or one of my favorite sayings that I've heard people say to me, especially when I tell them my research interests, is that a democracy is judged by how it treats its minorities.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you ask, Amy, are Jews safer in a democracy? Is anyone safer in a democracy? We have to ask ourselves first, like, how healthy is a given democracy? If it is indeed doing what it's supposed to and maintaining those institutions, and if they are working and evaluating people's rights the way they're supposed to, then yes, Jews should be safer in a democracy than in many other forms of government. So,
Mm-hmm.
sort of a circular answer. So, see, I didn't even answer the question. I gave you more, more to
Well,
water.
Hayley, yeah, Hayley, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to add in the context of the play, I completely agree with all of your questions and observations, Lauren. And one of the elements in the play is that one of the characters quotes the Prime Minister Val, and this character says, quoting Val, that if 2,000 people of Spanish origin left France, France would still be France. But if 2,000 Jewish people left France, we would be failed as a democracy. Our experiment here as a democratic nation will have failed. France will no longer be France. And I think, France will no longer be France was actually the quote. And I think sort of what I interpret that from is that our democratic experiment here, that our, that the structures that we've created to protect people, Jews being among them, will have failed. And I think that that's really profound. And I think it speaks to what Lauren was saying, that a democracy is there to hold everybody. And in France, that history goes back, relatively far. So
Farther than ours, yeah.
yes, farther than
Yeah,
ours. I know it's
farther than
history.
ours and different, yeah.
United States history is very young, shall we say?
Right. Especially,
Right.
especially compared to Jewish history. But
Yeah.
if I could, Amy, can I jump in with a comment on
Of course, yeah.
Haley's answer? Um, the to add to that, the reason that the prime minister's statement, which is really mind-blowing. I mean, it's almost like, it almost feels like the playwright made it up, except he
Mhm.
didn't, except the Prime Minister of France actually said that in January of 2015 after the massacre of Jewish shoppers at the kosher supermarket. And then after he said, the whole thing about if Jewish French Jews left, France will no longer be France, as Hayley said. And then the sentence after that is, the French Republic will be judged a failure. So,
Mm,
so then we have to ask ourselves why he said that about French Jews, but he said if the other groups, people, Frenchmen of Spanish origin, were to leave, it wouldn't feel this way. So it's not just a question of minority rights and if one minority leaves, then we failed. Why in particular French Jews? And we can extend that to would someone be able to make the same kind of statement with in terms of American Jews? And the
mm,
reason I think that it's pretty clear that he can say that about French Jews is because French Jews have been the test, and they have been the test of French democracy, certainly ever since the French Revolution, the first minority group to be emancipated, to receive political emancipation, receive citizenship, one really interesting
Napoleon. Yeah.
fact,
Mhm.
that when I teach this to my students in my modern Jewish history class, they learn that actually it came in two stages. That first, Sephardic Jews in France were emancipated almost a year before Ashkenazi Jews for various
Really?
reasons. Unpack that if you would like. But
Huh.
by 1790 and 1791, but this was the first such experiment, and there were vociferous debates in the French Parliament as they're creating the Republic about what to do about the Jews. These debates are also going on in Germany, which is not a unified Germany for another 100 years till Bismarck, what to do, how, whether the Jew should be a citizen, and if so, how to make the Jew an acceptable citizen. But they really are the test case. And then jump forward 100 years, and of course you have the Dreyfus affair in the 1890s, which would rip France asunder. And it was not just a question of, are Jews going to be accepted? Oh, how to treat the Jews, but what is France?
Hmm.
And the so-called pro-Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards were not necessarily the people who are on the side of Dreyfus weren't necessarily philo-Semites. They didn't particularly necessarily like Jews. It was to them a question of how far can the sort of the expansiveness of their republic stretch to still embrace people who are very different. And historians, not me, but historians who really specialize in France, I specialize in America, many people have written that a lot of what became modern France, the strict separation between church and state, etc., is a pretty direct result of the Dreyfus affair. So
Mm.
at every, and then, Vichy France, and at every juncture, you see French Jews above all forcing the Republic to either redefine itself or ask itself, like, what am I? And you can do
Kind of a,
something
yeah.
similar with America as well.
Well, I mean, before we switch to America, I mean, it's certainly true that in France, the Jews are sort of constantly a test case for the French idea of themselves, right? I mean, for the Enlightenment and for, a lot of French Jews still associate the emancipation with Napoleon and with the nation. And it's so knit up in the in self-image that's what makes one of the things that makes it's so interesting. But I mean, France and Germany, and I guess other places too, they wrestled for hundreds of years with something they called the Jewish question, right?
Mhm.
So in America, there was never a Jewish question, at least not in the same way. So, I mean, what's the, I mean, say we're always the test case. Say Jews are always the test case for nations' idea of themselves. Like, how does that work here? It seems like it's very different.
Hayley, do you want to answer first? Or?
Well, I think that it is very different, and yet, we're not France. It's a completely different country with a different history, et cetera. But I do think it's interesting, going back to the play, that Joshua Harmon, is an American
Yeah.
writing this
Right.
play. And did set the play in France. He has, I think, was inspired by relatives that had lived there. But still, I think it was an examination of our country, even though it was set in France. I think these questions are not exclusive to France, and certainly, um, so Charlottesville, and like we can go on and on, like Tree of Life, like so many things that have happened in the past years that these questions are present for us in the United States as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a slightly different form. Maybe we challenge the idea of America in more in the way that Lauren was talking about. Is that the idea that minorities are all protected, that there's rights for every minority, that everyone is safe.
And even if there are
Um,
rights, I guess the question is, are people still safe? Even if rights exist, what does that mean?
Yeah.
sure, yeah, and that goes back to the question of democracy. Is it just because you call it a democracy, does that safety is like, well, where does how does safety relate to democracy? If everyone has a voice but they're not safe, then do
And
they
I
really
think,
have a
in
voice?
this country, it's for other people of color, who are facing a lot of adversity, even under the circumstance of having rights, that there's still lots of acts of violence, unfortunately, that occur in this country. And that is saddening.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't need to have been called the Jewish question outright the way that it was in France, Germany, and other places. There definitely have been a number of times in American history where there was a Jewish question presented. Just one of many, being the toward the end of the 19th century, the so-called Gilded Age, when you had this interesting moment where the so-called German Jews, that's a generalization,
Yuckies, yeah.
but the Jewish immigrant group that had mostly arrived in the middle of the 19th century, many from Central Europe, were not all of them, but a number of them had done well. It's like the old Jewish joke, the dentists say, are you comfortable? I make a living. So
They've
sorry.
done okay.
Uh,
They've done okay.
right. They were comfortable. So they did very well. Some of them, so it's a small
Mm-hmm.
but significant
Mm-hmm.
minority. And the sort of social set in the Gilded Age were getting very alarmed at the idea that these Jewish upstarts were starting to potentially encroach on them socially and in
The
their
Eastern European immigrants,
the
the more
Germans, not the
the
East
more
Europeans, not the loud Yiddish speaking one, not my people,
not
but
us, no, but the
but
previous
our
ones.
crowd. So that's the thing. I mean, it's
Ah.
easier to keep out the people who are clearly of a different social class. But what
Mm-hmm.
do you
Mm-hmm.
do? And this is why it's more similar to some of the very acculturated, one might say assimilated Jews 100 or so years earlier in Germany, for instance, where it's a threat. It's much more of a threat when someone has made it socially and financially, and they want to join your country club. They want to live in your neighborhood. They might even want to date your daughter. And so that then caused people to ask what they did not articulate as such, but what it was essentially the Jewish question of at what point could these people ever become acceptable in the same way and be absorbed into our ranks? And
Hmm.
it was more of a social question than one of citizenship. So it's different
Right,
in that
right. It
way.
wasn't a political question, a voting question. You could become a citizen.
No, no.
Right,
Then that's a
right,
whole different ball of wax
right. So that's when
entirely.
it depends. Well, again, it's all part of democracy, but in a different at a different level. I remember, maybe you can tell me this is a myth, but once came across it just what I thought was a nasty, delightful factoid about these different distinctions of Jews coming in, and that is that for many years the Jewish Theological Seminary offered a course for rabbis called Pastoral Skills, and what it was table manners, because these people were coming into the rabbinate and they just didn't have the polish. They were the wrong kind of
I do.
Jews to be to
When do
be
you know when
rabbis.
that was taught?
Yeah, late 1880, I think. No, it was just how old is JTS? I actually don't know.
JTS,
Oh,
full disclosure, my alma mater for
I
my
know, I know.
PhD. It had an earlier incarnation starting in 1886, and then sort of was reorganized, redefined in 1902 when Solomon Schechter came in
Yeah.
as chancellor. That wouldn't surprise me. Look, at the same time, a little bit after the turn of the century, there were all sorts of venues for teaching, in this case, the new immigrants, mostly from Eastern Europe, teaching them all sorts of kind of manners and,
Hmm.
combination of table manners and civics and things like that. So
Right,
not
right. Just to
not
be
that
citizen,
surprising.
to fit in generally. So I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but I think it would make a good segue. I think Haley mentioned something about all these different groups who also have parallel issues, who also don't feel safe. I mean, one of the solution that's being debated in the play to the problem of being unsafe, and certainly one of the things that people talk about anywhere, including here, is immigration, right? If the problem is that you're not safe, the solution is flight. Where can we go? So, but since we're talking about democracy, I wonder if we wanted to take a step back and say, what are the other strategies people talk about? I mean, how are the other ways? I mean, American Jews have a whole panoply of different ways they th- have been trying to feel safe, to sort of to mixed effect, it seems. But do you want to allyships and things like that? I mean, is that outside the scope of the play completely? Do you think, Haley, or are there some ways
I
it
don't
could
think
be?
so because Marcel, the female, the male, the mother in the play,
Mm-hmm.
she says, what should I do? Am I a coward? When things like this happen, shouldn't I be here to stay here to fight?
Right,
And
right.
so she's got this debate within herself. And even Daniel, the young man who had had this act of anti-Semitism, um, placed against him, he has a very different approach than his parents. He's more of in favor of peace and making amends and kind of working with the system, and so everyone's got a little bit of a different view within the context of the play. It's really the father who starts and says, I want to move to Israel, and he has his mind sort of set on this one solution. But other people in the play, kind of offer other perspectives. And it is a good question. Like, do you leave or do you find value in where you are and that there's work to be done here? And as you said, like creating alliances, creating strategies, continuing to build and do the work. I think it's a profound question.
Lauren, what do you think? And I mean, to add to that, what about the strategy of seeking representation at the highest levels? I mean, that's another democratic strategy.
So the one of the courses I'm teaching right now, actually, and this was the group of students I brought yesterday. They're taking my course called Jews in the American Political Tradition. So, and it's very specifically not called Jews in Politics. It's really because it's bigger than that. It's the whole tradition. What does the tradition promise, and also how do citizens and non-citizens, frankly, how do people within the borders of this country, how can they engage with it? And although not the first opportunity for Jews to engage politically as modern citizens, America has really, I don't even want to say has offered. The American Jews have forced it to have
Right.
often
Yeah,
forced
they
its
have.
hand, have often forged those paths and developed those ways to engage, arguably more than any other group. And I try to stay away from superlatives. And I don't think it's always necessary to say the first, the biggest, the best, but it's hard to find another, certainly another ethnic group. And that's what Jews are in society. So, theology aside and ethnicity, that has engaged in and employed so many different ways to be a citizen or a resident. So whether it's lobbying or organizing in unions, organizing in a host of different organizations that unfortunately have acronyms that almost all sound alike, and or whether it's running for elective office, getting out the vote, being educators, being involved in the press, the incredible plethora of American Jewish newspapers and magazines, Nod to Moment magazine, over the
We
years
try.
is and is not only absolutely impressive in its variety, but also in the per capita circulation and how many people, for instance, in the immigrant community reading the Yiddish press would read more than one paper
Hmm.
and just be I sort of hate this word, but it's apt here, overrepresented. Um, and so those are all ways that Jews have really, as I said, been in the vanguard. One of the ways that I think we're finding more challenging right now than in past years, though, is the importance of forging coalitions, coalition building with other groups. And as I always tell my students, not only do you not need to agree with coalition members about everything, but by definition, if you agreed on everything with others that you're, creating coalition with, then you would be the same thing. You would be in the same
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
And so you had, for instance, in the middle of the 20th century, Jews and Catholics cooperating on certain issues. For instance, there was an effort to add a religion question to the census, to the American
Hmm.
census in the
That's
middle of the
that's
20th
yeah.
century. And the
Right.
organized Jewish community, especially the American Jewish Committee, worked with the organized Catholic community to really push back against this because they feared what it could do for other reasons to both of their groups to have people identifying on the census by religion for various reasons. Did they agree on other issues? No, not on, on certain ones, yes, certain ones, no. Unfortunately, in recent years, and in particular in the last year plus, since October 7th, but also before then, Jews in America, the majority of Jews in America, and it still is the majority of Jews in America who identify as either left of center or liberal or progressive or whatever word you want, or Democrats or whatever, have been in an increasingly narrowing place where it's harder to really engage or enter into these coalition partnerships. Um, it's overly simplistic to say on the left and on the right, but just for
Hmm. Hmm.
sake of argument, I'll say it on the left, partly because of Israel and what's been going on the right because of anti-Semitism, because Jews historically in America are in favor of more permissive immigration policies and are pro reproductive rights and all kinds of things like that. It's gotten harder and harder. So that's one really important element that American Jews have relied on. And were involved in most famously coalitions in the civil rights movement with Black Americans, but many other times as well. That's really, really proven challenging recently.
Yeah. Well, it's well, and that's all tied up with this question of American exceptionalism, I guess. I mean, we talked about French exceptionalism, and we're talking a little bit. How is it that the Jews have a different experience in America than anywhere else? If that's actually true, is it partly because of the health of these coalitions? And if so, is that not really, um, is that not as much of a through line as maybe we think it is? I mean, I'm going to ask you just generally about when I say American exceptionalism with regard to Jews.
Right.
Does that
You want
resonate for you
me
at
to go
all?
first or Haley?
I think
Yeah.
this is your specialty. You should take it, Lauren.
Yeah, I'll take it. Um, I was just trying to, go back and forth
Yeah.
with you. Um, it's interesting because I was actually just rereading after many times reading it, the really now classic article about American Jewish exceptionalism.
Hmm.
And that the article, I think I sent it to you, Amy, a while ago,
Oh,
um,
yes, yes.
by Professor Tony Michaels,
Hmm.
University of Wisconsin. And it's called it was first published in the journal American Jewish History in 2010. It's called "Is America Different?" question mark, a critique of American Jewish exceptionalism. And what he does is he goes through first this the history of first American historians and then American Jewish historians, joining with this myth of America writ large, not only for Jews being this magical place and so different from every other country, sort of just by definition. And uh, and then he critiques it and in several ways talks about, of course, the history of anti-Semitism, and the fact that it's not an aberration, and without even having to list all of the many examples of anti-Semitism ever since the founding of the Republic, and well before our current very fraught, admittedly scary moment. What he does is, in the end, says, first of all, there's that they are not aberrations. American Jewish historians and rabbis and communal leaders in the Jewish community had long tried to sort of push them aside by saying, yes, this happened, but yes, this happened, but this was an exception, and that was
Right.
weird, and
But still,
and
it's
that was
different.
because
Yeah.
of this. And it's
Mhm.
only in the last 5, 8 years that I think the American Jewish establishment, leadership, whatever you want to call it, is saying, yes, we have a problem. Yes, we have an anti-Semitism problem. So part of the value of this article is coming forward and saying, no, there actually is a tradition of Jew hatred in this country, but then also putting that back into this larger theoretical framework of American exceptionalism and saying, is there something different, inherently different about America, about what America offers to American Jews, and by extension, maybe to other minorities? And he correctly says that you have to look at timing, for instance. When was emancipation offered to this country
Mhm.
versus German Jews? You can't just look at one country and compare it to all of the other countries at the same time, and say, oh, look how advanced we are. Well, those countries have a longer history. They have perhaps more reactionary movements to overcome initially. And that at the end of the day, it maybe isn't as different as we would like to think, and
Mhm.
maybe is a cautionary tale that it is more the tradition of democracy and and of protecting minorities and Jews in particular is more vulnerable and requires, and this is my optimistic spin on this,
Hmm.
requires people to go back in and engage with the process and run for office and write and educate, etc. It's gotten harder in recent years, but there are still potential coalition partners out there. And so, do I think there's a myth of American Jewish exceptionalism? Yes, I think there is, but it has been waning because of the awareness of anti-Semitism, but it still lingers on because people still feel like, well, yes, there's anti-Semitism, but we have these built-in protections. That's not
Hmm.
enough. So it needs to
Right.
be safeguarded.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, if I wanted to be take this in a really more dark direction, which I think I won't do, I would say don't Jews in every country think that their country they have exceptionalism. Oh, this is not like all the others. We're fine here. It's not
No,
like
I don't think that
you
Jews in
don't
every
you don't think
country
so.
feel that way.
Good.
And
Good.
and they've engaged politically in different countries in different ways. In many countries, they took shelter under, and we're actually seeing this again, took shelter under more reactionary
Hmm.
leaders, hoping that if they either flattered them or helped uphold their rule, then they would be protected, a sort of favored minority. Um, we saw the crown Jews in 18th and
The
17th
court Jews.
century.
The
The
court
court
Jews.
Jews, yeah,
Right.
I knew.
Yeah. The whole
My
feud.
brain is
Yeah.
my brain is melting. The court Jews,
No, no, it's been a long day.
and we saw
Yeah.
that in North
Yeah.
Africa. Speaking of French
Yeah.
Jews, North Africa, with the Jews there feeling very vulnerable in the 19th and early 20th century for good reason, and seeking and they received special citizenship. Something called the Cremieux Decree in the 1870s, which gave Jews in North Africa citizenship, but didn't give other people in the same
Hmm.
country citizenship. And they felt that that would protect them. And maybe it did at the beginning, but then it made their neighbors all the more resentful of them, and there were terrible pogroms and everything like that. So I don't think actually that Jews in every country feel that their situation is exceptional. I think they've reached out almost desperately in a lot of different ways to try to hang on.
Hmm.
And then back to the play. The other option, of course, is just to leave.
Hmm. Well, it's funny that I mean, I would have when I just having seen the play, I would have thought that it was all about sort of French exceptionalism. That they think, well, we're French. It's the French, that character who comes in and says, "Are you kidding me? France is the best country for Jews. It's the only country for Jews." Look at this history. Look at Napoleon. Look at all these aspects. But the fact, Haley, when you said before that this is actually not written by a French, it's not a French playwright, it's an American playwright looking to events that happened in France, I guess in 2016, 2015, um, as a prism for something else, that sort of changes the sense of what it's really about in my mind. I wanted to ask one other. Before we go to questions, I have two other quick things. One is sort of an aside. Um, I moment ran a question, a moment debate. I think it was in our the strongman issue that we just had, and the question was, can Jews flourish under authoritarians? It's sort of the flip side of the democracy question. It's people assume that Jews are safest in democracies, but historically speaking, have they ever flourished under authoritarians? And it's always the yes and the no kind of plowed the same ground, which was, well, you have to have someone at the strategies have always been to sort of swap safety for options, and to have somebody at the center and somebody in the inside whispering into the dictator's ear, sort of the Esther figure. Um, and I wonder if that really I wonder if there's really a distinction there between that and the kind of representation we've been talking about, where you want people, you want representation at the highest levels, but it's is it more than just the Hofjude, the court Jew approach? Is that is that too narrow a question?
I
Or
don't know if it relates to the play specifically, but I would say, um, I'm kind of in line with Lauren's what Lauren's alluded to, even though I think she posed it back as a question. But I think overall, a democracy does seem to be a better situation for Jewish people through history.
hmm
So
right, okay.
if I were to put my if I were to bet in an area or an area that I would prefer to see them things go in, that would be in that area. And I think overall, that tends to be better for Jewish people.
Yeah, I would
Lauren,
say
sounds like you would
the
say the same.
idea of whether Jews or anyone is safer living under authoritarian rule is that you might be, or it might seem so at the beginning or under certain conditions, but you're living on borrowed time.
hmm
And so there's a lot of there's a rich body of scholarship on especially the Jews I was talking about before in Central Europe in the 17th and 18th century, and the story in particular of some of them who were had royal patrons, and then if their royal patron fell out of favor or lost his head or something, then his Jew was close behind.
Right,
So,
right.
so that
Yeah.
gets back to, you want your rights woven into the fabric of society and not dependent on, the bully in the playground.
And I guess I
Yeah.
would even go so far as to say that there's something like very Jewish in the ethos of, democracy, because, if you go to any synagogue and you hear any rabbi speak, they're always looking at things from a multiplicity of angles, a prismatic view. We're a culture that really appreciates debate. And so I think that sort of a culture that, flourishes in a democratic society.
hmm hmm Yeah, no, I had a question that I think now the direction we're going. There was an influential 1940 book in 1949 written about communism, which also at one time Jews put great hopes in as the answer to their problems of safety. And the book's called The God That Failed. And it's a very famous series of essays by different thinkers about why communism turned out not to be the God it was thought to be. And there was subsequently, not, I mean, I forget exactly when, but there was a more recent book of essays that attempted to run the same thing on democracy and say, well, maybe is democracy the God that's failed? So, I mean, is there any reason to think that that's happening, or are we still all in for democracy?
I think the problem is looking at any political system as a god.
Right, right, makes
And
sense. Yeah.
not to be heretical, but uh I think that's okay. The the key, or one key, I think, is always keeping the system on its toes and never taking for granted that it's going to be self-propelling. It's not. The strength of your democracy is only as enduring, as strong as the people's will to keep it that way,
hmm
and to be willing to speak out about its faults. There's a lot of very draconian, boundary drawing recently. I think there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, especially among Democrats this week of, what was wrong, what went wrong in the election, and sometimes there's an unwillingness to admit on all sides that there might be something wrong with you, and and among countries also. So I think that democracy is great when it works, but it just ain't gonna survive by itself.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think if I may, unless Haley, you want to add something to that, I was going to
That's
segue
it.
just briefly in the time we have. Sorry?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I
In,
thought
in
that
the,
was very well said, Laura, and I appreciated the way you articulated that.
yes, I
My
agree.
excellent, my
Very
excellent
rousing.
grammar.
No, extremely heartening, I would say, in a lot of ways, sort of bracing. Um, so we have a couple of interesting sort of listener questions, and one I'm just going to jump to it now because you know the a listener points out that there's all this talk about fleeing in the play and elsewhere, and what about when the place you're fleeing to also is having issues with democracy? I mean, what does that change the? I don't think we want to do a whole Israel conversation right now because that's would be another 10 hours, but. Um, what about I mean, can a place still be a refuge if you're worried about it on the democratic side? If you're worried that it's less of a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really great question. I think it's going to be a different answer. It's a personal question, right? I think it's a different for different people in the same way that in this play, some of the people want to go to Israel and some of the people don't want to go to Israel. Some people want to stay put. Ultimately, it has to be a personal choice when it comes to these
Mhm.
types of questions.
And you hear, even though those events are 10 years ago, you heard people there say, oh, what's so safe about that? How's that safer? Well, it's a different kind of safer, right?
Right, right.
Lauren,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it is not only is it very personal, but perhaps the either the young American cousin in the play or in her sort of last conversation with her young French cousin, Daniel, one of them says something about like, but you need to be there in order to fight.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
both courses of action are legitimate, I think are presented in really legitimate ways in the play. The choice to just ultimately leave, which is heart-wrenching, is seen, you really understand it. And the choice to say, this has been my family's home for generations or centuries, I'm going to stay and fight for it, is also understandable. What is, I think, less understandable and not presented as sympathetically in the play, and I agree with the playwright about this, is the guy who says, "No, I'm just gonna hide who I am and then wait for it to blow over." And so history has shown us that that doesn't really work. But if I could just make one point that I noticed yesterday. I was looking at actually for my course. Most of what I teach is modern, but I'm teaching a course in ancient and medieval Jewish civilization,
Ooh.
and yeah, and there is possibly the most famous traveler in Jewish history, was a fascinating guy named Benjamin of Tudela, coming from Spain, and he was a 12th century Jewish traveler, and so he lived in the middle of the 1100s, and for various reasons, he traveled the known world and covered more of it than really anybody. And he wrote about it. And he visits Jewish communities all over Western Europe and Central Europe, and he goes to China and to Asia, and he writes what he finds in all of these Jewish communities. And what just really hit me reading this yesterday, right after seeing the play, is that he's writing these notes shortly after the first two major crusades that have decimated the areas of densest Jewish settlement in the
Mm.
Rhine River Valley. So what would become French and German Jewry, and they're fleeing and there are massacres in England. And then he's also encountering, even though it's not the big expulsion from Spain that we know of at the end of the 15th century, there are Jews fleeing from Spain from the Almohad invasion, and they're fleeing across North Africa. This is Maimonides' family. And so it's not just that this guy, Benjamin of Tudela, is backpacking. He's visiting because there are many Jewish communities in the world at that point that are in crisis. And he keeps
Mm.
coming across in every community Jews who didn't start out in that community, who were fleeing from other communities. And
Mm,
it feels to him and to many of them like it's coming from all directions, and that they're at this fraught moment of instability and total vulnerability. And everywhere he goes, there are Jews asking, where should we go? And he visits the land of
mm,
Israel, and have always been Jewish communities living in the land of Israel, and some people are going there, although it's very hard. And it just really, really, I got this pang of, still asking that question. He's living in the 1100s, and we're still asking this question in Washington and in Tel Aviv and in Paris today. Then I also felt like, he wrote it all down, and we have these people's stories, and we're still here reading them and still talking about.
mm.
And and
Yeah.
somehow for many, many reasons, too many individual people did not survive those upheavals, those paroxysms. But those communities, they left, they came back, they went somewhere else. It was good then it got bad there. It's 1,000 years ago that he wrote these
Interesting.
things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
or
Wow.
900, what's the difference
This is
between
brought up in the play too, the idea of Jewish people write it all down. Why do
right?
we
Right.
people the
And
book
talking about the
writing
Crusades in
it
the
down?
in the play as well.
Yeah.
So that can, if you're a glass half full person, half empty person, you're going to say, "Oh my God, this is still happening." If you're a glass half full person, you say, "Still here, still doing it." So,
Yeah, there's the
Right.
resilience, right? The resilience.
Yeah. So Haley, I guess I'll let you take us out on this one. Do you think in the play do you want people to come away with a glass half full, glass half empty feeling, or you
I think
know?
the play is hopeful at the end. I mean, there's a lot that happens and it's a lot that's heart-wrenching, but I think that the play, similar to the note that you just were talking about at the end, Elodie, one of the characters says, despite it all, we're still here. We are
Mm-hmm.
still
Mm-hmm.
here. And I think that spirit of resilience is something that is emphasized in this play. And I think that's really beautiful.
yeah, well
Okay. I'm
done.
not gonna. Did you want to say something more, Lauren? I think
No, no, I'm saying
that's a nice
it's
top note.
beautiful. It's also really well done.
Yeah, it's very well done. So,
Right.
people, anyone who's in the area who's listening to this, go see this play. And one person in the questions asked when if ever it would be live streamed, and she's waiting for the play script to be printed. And I guess Haley, do you
Uh,
know, will it be live streamed?
I think that the play just got published through Concord just recently. So I think you can get access to the play online if you're looking for it. We will not be live streaming our performance because of Actors Equity rules. So you need to be here in DC to see it. And it runs through November 24th. So this is my pitch. Please come and check out this play. I think it's really meaningful, especially in this moment.
Yeah, well, here, and but also for those of you not in Washington, I am sure this play will continue to make the rounds because it is really it transcends its initial setting of a decade ago in a lot of ways.
Yes,
So
I'm sure
thank
it will
you.
happen
Yeah,
across the country.
yeah. So let's hope it doesn't continue to be this timely. Um, So thank you both so much, and thanks everyone
Thank you, Amy.
for tuning in
Yes,
and
thank you for the
listening. And
conversation. Thanks, Amy.
Suzanne.
Thank you,
yeah,
Lauren. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank
Bye,
you, all of you.
everybody. Stay
Bye.
safe.
break
Thank
a leg,
you.
you guys. Good luck.